Hello besties, and welcome to the first video in a series of videos about Khaenri'ah from Genshin Impact. In this series, I'm gonna be sort of diving into the Genshin Impact lore and looking at Khaenri'ah, connections to it, and all that. Real quick disclaimer before we get started, every theory in here, although based on solid canon evidence, is tied to my own personal speculations, and because of that, the theories are subject to change or be confirmed in the future. All evidence is from the game, the webcomic, or the official wiki, all of which will be linked in the description. The decent amount of background knowledge on Genshin Impact's game and character lore is recommended. Spoilers for pretty much everything ahead. You can find the work in progress Google Doc that I'm writing everything for the theory on in the description as well. In today's video, for our search for Khaenri'ah, I'm starting with the Archons and Celestia and their sort of relationship to Khaenri'ah. But before I can get into that, I need to first give you some background on what Khaenri'ah actually is. Khaenri'ah was a godless nation that was destroyed 500 years ago in reference to the current date in Genshin Impact's timeline. Everyone there either died or became a non-human enemy like a Hilichurl or Abyss Mage, with few exceptions. One such exception was Dainsleif, who was supposed to protect Khaenri'ah from the attack but failed and was punished with immortality by an unknown entity. The Abyss Order is an organization that functions as Khaenri'ah's last hope. The organization is made up of transformed citizens of the godless nation and your sibling, Lumine or Aether, depending on who you chose to play as at the beginning of the game. Your sibling is at the head of the Abyss Order currently while you fight against it with Dainsleif. Khaenri'ah was a technologically advanced nation, possibly to make up for their lack of divine powers. The nation is responsible for ruin guards, ruin hunters, and ruin graders, which were actually called field tillers by the people who created them. The people of Khaenri'ah practice Chemia, an advanced type of alchemy that can create life itself. The only known practitioners of it are Albedo and Reindotir, I think I'm pronouncing that right, implying that they're both from Khaenri'ah. So that's all the background you really need on Khaenri'ah. That's pretty much all the background we have in the lore. I'm sure there's more background on it, but you can see pictures of what it used to look like during the destruction, and I'll get into that later. But here we go into the Archons and Celestia. In Chapter 1, Act 4, we will be reunited. Dainsleif implies that the Archons were responsible for the eradication of Khaenri'ah. He never explicitly says that, but instead says that the gods are not trustworthy because they killed everyone in Khaenri'ah just because they were a godless country. Dainsleif didn't say that the Archons specifically did it, but rather that the gods as a whole did. It's important to remember that while Archons are gods, not all gods are Archons. There are gods with less power than the Archons, and more importantly, gods with more power than them. For example, the Celestial gods are the highest authority of the Immortals in Teyvat, far above the Archons. The Gnosis held by the Archons are powers bestowed upon them from the Celestial gods after they won their places in Celestia during the Archon War. So the Archons are not the most powerful gods in Teyvat, the Celestial gods are. And that's who I mean when I'm referring to Celestia as like a person. Most of the Archons we know are not the original Archons. Venti, for example, was a replacement for the original Animo Archon Decarabian. Dragonspine's lore provides us with the story of another destroyed kingdom, Salvindagnir, and how they possibly tried to fight against Celestia. That potential fight led to the Celestial gods dropping Skyfrost Nail on the kingdom, which caused it to get buried under what we now see as Dragonspine. Whether or not it was purposeful insolence or an accidental failure, the people of Salvindagnir angered the Celestial gods so much that they felt the need to kill everyone there. In the video where I talk about Dragonspine, which is not this video, but one later in the series, I'll go in more depth about that story. This is a similar situation to what we hear from Dainsleif in regards to Khaenri'ah. He says that the gods, not specifically Archons, but heavily implies such, destroyed Khaenri'ah because the people there didn't believe in their own specific god. There's a clear pattern of gods killing humans because they don't live up to their expectations. However, I think it's important to distinguish between the Celestial gods and Archons, not just in general, but specifically in relation to the fall of Khaenri'ah. So first, let's talk about the first Archon we ever met, Venti. Although Venti isn't the original Animo Archon, Venti held the title when Khaenri'ah was destroyed. 500 years ago, when Khaenri'ah fell, Venti sent Dvalin to save Mondstadt from the terror of Durin. Durin is Dragonspine's namesake and a being created with Chemia, so we know that Durin came from Khaenri'ah. This makes you think that during the battle, practitioners of Chemia who created Durin sent him to attack Mondstadt as vengeance or a way to remove Venti from the battle. But Dvalin instead went to quell the threat, so Venti was able to stay in Khaenri'ah. Venti's concern for Mondstadt and preservation of its freedom seems to be their main priority in and out of the game. During the cutscene after fighting Storm Terror for the first time, Venti says, "Freedom, if demanded of you by a god, isn't freedom at all," to the newly freed Dvalin. In the webcomic, Venti and Vanessa work together to take down the tyrannical monarch of Mondstadt and form the Knights of Favonius to protect the freedom of Mondstadt's people. So I don't think it makes sense for Venti to participate in the destruction of an entire nation just because they were godless. Venti cares deeply about human life and letting humans live however they wish to, so it doesn't make sense. It goes against everything they stand for. You could argue that Venti used to be different, but even in early depictions of Barbados, it seems like he had a similar personality and identical values. In their voice line more about Venti 4, Venti describes Celestia negatively, saying that the water there tastes foul and the fruit is bland. I wouldn't go there even if I was invited. However, in the past, Venti was literally invited to Celestia. We know that purely because we know Venti is the current Animo Archon. It appears to me that Venti became an Archon to preserve the freedom of the nation in which they reside. Venti rarely talks about Celestia outside of that one voice line. It seems that they have had very negative experiences with the celestial gods and that they wish to be distanced from them. Maybe that's why Venti doesn't put up much of a fight when La Senora steals his Gnosis. He no longer wants to be connected to Celestia.
So, this is a Gnosis,
Wouldn't be caught dead wearing this ugly thing in public. Beauty is a waste when the beholder has no taste.
A different story with a similar ending is Zhongli. Although Zhongli and Venti have incredibly different personalities and values, their attitudes towards their respective nations and Celestia are very similar. A major part of Zhongli's story is their continued dedication to Liyue despite retiring as an Archon. Liyue takes the relationship between humans and immortals more seriously than Mondstadt does, but the immortals in Liyue don't hate humans just for not doing what they want. You could argue that the majority of the Adepti don't care that much about humans, and while that's true, that doesn't mean they're going to go out of their way to be violent towards them. If anything, the Adepti still want to protect human life. At the end of the Liyue Archon quest, all of the living Adepti helped us defeat Osile, including those who were apprehensive about it. The threat of Osile destroying Liyue didn't affect the Adepti, but rather the humans that they share the nation with. Zhongli is also technically an Adeptus. Besides Ganyu, Zhongli is one of the few Adepti who embraces human life with no reluctance. In their voice line about Keqing, Zhongli says he admires the beliefs of people like her. Keqing is known for her belief that the gods are basically useless, so it doesn't make sense to me that Zhongli would kill everyone in Khaenri'ah because it was a godless nation either. At the end of Historia Antiqua Act 2, No Mere Stone, you and Paimon ask Zhongli about what happened in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago. Zhongli says that they're contractually obligated not to say anything about the incident. Who the agreement is with is never talked about or even implied, so it's up to our own speculation to figure that out. It wouldn't make any sense for Zhongli to enter a contract with the survivors in the form of the Abyss Order because they clearly have no problem talking about it. The only other candidate that could be related to the situation would be the Celestial Gods. Now I'm about to do a little bit of legal speak, so I'm gonna try my best to make this sound relatable to normal people. I think the Celestial Gods had Zhongli agree to something similar to our modern version of a non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement, usually just referred to as an NDA, is a contract between two parties that states that both of them are supposed to keep information between the two of them in reference to a particular situation confidential. If the contract Zhongli tells you about is like an NDA with the Celestial Gods, it would be closest to a unilateral NDA. That means the disclosing party, Celestia, anticipates disclosing information to the receiving party, Zhongli, and the disclosing party wants to keep the receiving party from saying anything about it. These are common in politics and business to maintain legal secrecy or to limit disclosure before press releases, respectively. The disclosing information in the case of a unilateral NDA between Zhongli and the Celestial Gods would be just everything about what happened in Khaenri'ah. If all of that confused you, let me give you a more understandable example of what an NDA would be like. So let's say I work for a business and my boss is having me create a product that hasn't been released to the general public yet. My boss would have me sign an NDA saying that I'm not allowed to talk about it until after it's released, and if I did, they would be able to pursue legal action against me. Recently, NDAs have gained a reputation for being tied to shady people and events. For example, some social media influencers make their friends sign unilateral or multilateral NDAs to prevent them from publicly speaking about their poor, offensive, and/or illegal behavior. In the context of the NDA-adjacent agreement between Zhongli and Celestia, it appears similar to the morally questionable modern equivalent.
An enterprise that is asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement that favors another party. The enterprise is wise to stop and think about this carefully. You're typically saying, I agree that you're going to give me some sensitive information, and I'm going to make sure that it's not disclosed to unauthorized people, and I'm not going to use it in my organization without authority. And maybe that non-disclosure agreement goes on to say, and I will secure the information. All of those obligations can be actually very hard for any kind of organization, large or small, to fully comply with.
We can't talk about the fall of Khaenri'ah without talking about the Dendro Archon. The Dendro Archon is the youngest Archon who currently holds the position, only having obtained the title 500 years ago. 500 years ago is of course when Khaenri'ah fell. The current Dendro Archon rose to power following the death of the previous Dendro Archon who died during the destruction of Khaenri'ah. The current Dendro Archon is the god of wisdom, but the one who was involved in Khaenri'ah was the god of the woods. According to the Genshin Impact wiki, they were in Khaenri'ah when disaster descended upon the ancient kingdom, during which they were killed. The wording of this is very interesting. Disaster descended on Khaenri'ah, not explicitly calling it attack from the Archons or any other gods. It's strange how the descent of disaster was enough to kill the god of the woods. The Archons are supposed to be some of the strongest entities in Teyvat, so whatever disaster descended upon the previous Dendro Archon had to be something of greater power. The Genshin Impact wiki also describes the Tsaritsa's relationship to the Cataclysm in Khaenri'ah almost immediately when you start reading her profile. It reads, "The Tsaritsa is not one of the original members of the Seven who emerged victorious at the end of the Archon War. When and how she ascended to the position of Cryo-Archon is yet unknown, but it was sometime before the incident 500 years ago which left her deeply changed." We already know that something incredibly scarring and violent happened in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago, so to me it sounds like whatever the Tsaritsa witnessed has traumatized her. If it was truly that disturbing for her, I don't think she would have wanted to participate in the destruction of Khaenri'ah in the first place. Even if that isn't true, the Tsaritsa is described as being the embodiment of love before the fall of Khaenri'ah, and she lost it after that happened. Someone who embodied love would not destroy a whole nation out of spite. It's difficult to place Baal's motives and loyalties when it comes to Celestia. In my opinion, it seems like she would side with Celestia, but there's no concrete evidence of that yet. When Inazuma comes out and we get to play the Archon quest there, I'll probably update her section heavily, but for now, it looks like she's loyal to Celestia. Baal says she's nearest unto heaven, quoted by Zhongli, not her direct words, but that makes me think that she highly respects Celestia and the celestial gods. In her personality section on the Genshin wiki, it says she ascended somewhere between 500 and 2,000 years ago. 500 years ago automatically triggers Khaenri'ah in my head. The current Dendro Archon is confirmed to have replaced the previous one after they died in Khaenri'ah, so if Baal ascended more recently, it would make sense for her to have been in a similar situation to the current Dendro Archon. Not all of the Archons have enough solid evidence that points us in the direction of Khaenri'ah, but half is a decent number to make an educated guess. All of the Archons who have explicit ties to the fall of Khaenri'ah have negative experiences in relation to it and or Celestia. Because the celestial gods have more power than the Archons, they could possibly have forced them to participate in the destruction of Khaenri'ah. I don't think the Archons are solely responsible for the fall of Khaenri'ah, but as it appears now, it seems like they were forced to at least help. The celestial gods are extremely vengeful, so maybe they would have threatened to take the Archons' gnosis or destroy their own nations too. It wouldn't be the first time Celestia destroyed a nation either, remember Salvindagnir. It doesn't add up that the Archons would destroy Khaenri'ah voluntarily, especially because it really does look like the celestial gods were heavily involved too. The unknown god's powers appear identical to the ruins of Khaenri'ah. The unknown god isn't confirmed to be one of the celestial gods, but it wouldn't surprise me if she was, considering her actions and titles. She calls herself the sustainer of heavenly principles and denounces the arrogation of mankind. That sounds like the kind of thing a vengeful celestial god would say. So in summary, it really does look like all the evidence is pointing to the Archons not being fully responsible. Even though they were forced to participate in the destruction of Khaenri'ah, I don't think we can place all of the blame on them because it really isn't their fault. Even the ones who would have willingly participated, like Baal, still would have been forced to even if they weren't willing. We can't make a 100% sure call on the Hydro Archon or Pyro Archon, but when we get more information on them, I'll inevitably make a video including them as well. But for now, I don't think we should believe Dainsleif's claims that the Archons are solely responsible for the destruction of Khaenri'ah when that just doesn't seem true at all. Of course, I'll be updating this theory as more information comes out, whether it's through the comic or through the actual game or the wiki. However we get more canon information, I will be continuing to make these videos. But as of now, I can solidly say that I really do not think that the Archons were responsible for the destruction of Khaenri'ah. I think we need to blame the celestial gods themselves. Thanks for watching, besties.